Hello and welcome to Thursday Thoughts. Thursday Thoughts? What the hell are they? I hear you cry. Well, my friend Polly and I meet every week over on Instagram to talk all things personal growth because she is as obsessed with it as I am. And we decided that we might as well put those conversations out as a weekly podcast. So now you can listen to us chat here on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you listen to podcasts. And we'll be talking about topics such as spirituality, limiting beliefs, ego, imposter syndrome, gratitude, meditation, confidence, and so much more. So if you're ready, here we go. What are we going to talk about?
I know. Well, podcasting is a great one to talk about, I think, because it's kind of really transformed both yours and my lives. I think probably fair to say, hasn't it? So maybe we could start, Lucy, by you telling us a little bit, because you started your podcast before me, 3 months before I did, and you were actually a huge inspiration as to why I started my podcast. But maybe we could start with you telling us a little bit about why you got into it and how you got into it.
Yeah.
Because I don't know if I fully know why you got started, how it all began for you.
Yeah, well, basically, I'd never ever thought ever about starting a podcast. It just wasn't something that I'd ever thought about. And in fact, funnily enough, I remember, it's sort of so ironic. I remember years ago when I was still working at Radio 2 and podcasts were just like in their very, very early days. And somebody at work at Radio 2 mentioned the word podcast. And I remember saying, what the hell is a podcast? And a really kind of scathing, like, what is that? But funnily enough, when I was at Radio 2, I definitely always had this feeling that I would kind of rather be on the other side of the mic, the one that's kind of talking or the one that's performing, because I worked at Radio 2, which is a music station, so we had lots of bands coming in and, la, la, la. And I would always sort of secretly wish that was me doing either the presenting or the, singing in a band, because I was in a band many, many years ago. But basically, it was just something that completely went out of my mind. And then I left Radio 2, and then I left the job after that. And then, as you know, in the beginning of lockdown, my life sort of changed because I made a decision to change it, basically, and decided that I wanted to sort of start living on my own terms. And and this was where my journey of personal growth started. And one thing I'll say about podcasting is that I would never have started a podcast if I hadn't done a lot of inner work. Like, it just wouldn't have happened because I wouldn't have had the confidence. I wouldn't have been able to kind of get over myself and just get out of my own way to start one. But I actually started writing a book. That's a whole other story that we won't go into now. But in July 2021, I think it must have been, so Christ, nearly 2 years ago, I out of nowhere came up with the idea to write a book about being single and not having kids. And I remember it so vividly. I was sitting outside my flat where I live now on this bench just outside my window, and it was this beautiful summer's day in July, and out of nowhere, because I never thought about writing a book ever, and out of nowhere I had this idea to write a book. And to cut a long story short, about 2 or 3 months later, after that, I'd been listening to a podcast. I'd been listening to Kathy's podcast. Kathy Heller, for anyone who doesn't know, she has a podcast. She's American, and she talks a lot about podcasting and personal growth and spirituality and all of that kind of stuff. And actually, it was through listening to her talk about podcasting that I just suddenly thought, you know what, I'm going to start a podcast. But I can't remember the exact moment that it came to me, but it's just really weird how it had never occurred to me to start my own podcast, and then suddenly, sort of out of nowhere, I was like, this is what I'm going to do. And the thing about it is, and to put it in context of the reason we do these Monday motivations, in other words, to sort of talk about growth and development and all of that kind of stuff, the main thing I would say about having a podcast is that it has forced me to do a few things. Number one, it's forced me to be able to take action without it being perfect, and just constantly keep in mind, done is better than perfect, done is better than perfect. I mean, that is the sort of number one, because it's like with anything, if you're waiting to be ready, and if you're waiting for it to be perfect, then it's never ever good. You're never going to do it. So you just have to start, and you just have to do it messy. So when I started this, I really, I made a decision. It was like, I am doing it. It's not, I'm trying to start a podcast, not I'm thinking about starting a podcast. It's, I've made a decision, and I literally put a date in the diary and kind of sent an email out to, at that point, I didn't even have an Instagram account. So I sent out an email to like family and friends saying, I'm starting a podcast on 22/2/22, because that was the date, 22nd of February 22. And then, yeah, by sort of putting that, by basically holding myself accountable, by talking about it and saying that I was going to start it, that kind of forced me into it. And then I think really the two main things I would say about anything like this is that I think the two things that it requires more than anything else is, number one, courage and getting out of your comfort zone. You have to get used to that feeling of discomfort, because it's just a given that you are going to feel like a twat. You are going to feel like you sound ridiculous, and you are going to have a million doubts about putting your voice out there. So number one, you just have to sort of find the courage to just upload the freaking thing. And number two, it's certainly, for me anyway, one of the big things that I've had to kind of conquer is the fear of what people are going to think. And that's always been my one of my big challenges, is just that worry of what people think. And the irony is that it's not people I don't know. Like I could put a podcast out to 1 million people that I've never met before, but it's the people in my life who've known me for years. They're the ones whose judgment I worry about. They're the ones that I think are going to kind of laugh at me or take the piss or whatever it is. So really it's those two things, courage and getting over that fear of what other people think, have been two real game changers. And don't get me wrong, it's a work in progress. Like, I have to work on this stuff pretty much every day, as I'm sure you'll understand. But the brilliant thing about having a podcast is that it does, in a way that is so unexpected, it just sort of starts opening up doors that you never even thought of. And also, as somebody who was never into social media, as I say, I wasn't even on Instagram. I started an account because I started a podcast. One thing I've realized is that you really can make connections with people online, meaningful connections. Well, you and I, for a start. And it's amazing how it's an amazing feeling when you start getting really great feedback from listeners, and you know that your words are kind of resonating with people, because that's why you're doing it. And actually, if I ever have a moment where, like, if I'm posting something on Instagram and I'm thinking, oh Christ, everyone's going to be rolling their eyes at this caption, or if I'm posting if I'm uploading a podcast that I'm a bit worried about, I just think to myself, if there is one person who benefits from that episode or from that post on Instagram, then it's worth it. So that's the kind of thing I have in the back of my mind. But my God, I mean, as I'm sure you'll attest, it's a freaking steep learning curve, and it's a journey, and it's a continuous journey that I'm on every day, as I'm sure you are too.
Yeah, my goodness. I mean, all of that. Yeah, exactly the same. All of that. I mean, for me, I honestly still can't quite believe that I have a podcast, and I've been podcasting for over a year, because honestly, Lucy, if you had known me even just a few years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, I was so nervous about putting my voice out there. I did not want to be visible at all. I would not be in front of the camera ever. I had no confidence in using my voice and talking out loud. And to have, and as you said, it has been a real journey to get to this point, because I've had to do so much work on myself to be able to have that courage to actually just do it messy and not do it perfect, and just put it out there and really let go of all of those worries about what people are going to think. For me, a really big part of it was I've been listening to podcasts for a while. I had been listening to Kathy Heller's podcast for a while, and she, as you say, she talks a lot about podcasting. She talks a lot about getting out of your comfort zone and just doing it messy. All of those things really, really resonated with me. But I also have a really fantastic friend, Colette, at Colette Macbeth Storytelling. She's big on Instagram, and she did like a founding members course, which is all about storytelling and getting visible on video. And so I was one of her founding members on that course, on her beta course. And oh my gosh, that for me was a real turning point. She gave me that confidence to just let go of what people think, the confidence to be myself. And I think that we're all worried about what people are actually going to think about us. But actually, when you can just show up as you and realize that is where the magic is when you can just be yourself, then it just makes everything feel so much easier. It still, don't get me wrong, it still sometimes feel uncomfortable, and actually every time I do a podcast interview I still get little butterflies before I do it. And every time I talk to anybody online, even before I do these, I will do some deep breaths, I will really ground and center myself, I will do a little kind of like, please let this be a good interview kind of thing, and just to kind of get me there. But all those little practices really help, because it still feels uncomfortable. But when I did, I'm very similar to you, I don't know where the idea came from, but I just thought, do you know what, I'm going to do this. And I acted pretty swiftly. I remember having conversations with you. I remember mentioning to you after I first met you, I'm thinking you're having a podcast, and you were like, do it. And really helped me kind of get that motivation just to go for it. But it was after I did that first episode, which I must admit, I probably recorded about 3 times my first episode, because like, oh no, I can't put it out. And it was quite a vulnerable share, my first episode, all about my own experience of going through perimenopause and all the struggles which I had to sort of get over and move forward with. But that first episode, oh my God, I've had so many comments from women saying to me, oh my God, I felt exactly the same. I thought you were talking to me. That episode was literally like you were talking to me and telling my own experience. And so that was enough to kind of just go, right, okay, if you're finding this helpful, if you're feeling heard and understood for the first time ever, then obviously I've got to just keep doing this. I've got to keep going. And that is what has been spurring me on. And again, just getting comfortable with the idea that not every episode is perfect, and some are definitely better than others, without a doubt. But I just have met so many interesting people. I have learned so much from others, and that is all really helping inform the work I do with people as well. So it's just been so good. But yes, courage has been such a big part of it, and it's really helped me grow in confidence and continues to help me grow in confidence. I would really recommend it to anybody for that reason.
Completely. Just to pick up on one thing, Polly, like you were saying that people listened to your first episode and were like, oh my God, and I had exactly the same thing. But funnily enough, I remember so vividly the day that my first, and I'm sure you remember this vividly too, the day that my very first episode went out. And I was working in the coffee shop that morning, so I was there from like 7 a.m, and I remember feeling like literally sick all day. Like I felt, and what was interesting is that I hadn't appreciated, well, because how could I have? I'd never done it before, but I just hadn't anticipated how vulnerable it was going to feel to put my voice out into the world, even if only at that point 3 people listened or whatever. But it's amazing how you do feel vulnerable in it, and it is about that fear of sort of being seen and being heard. And I, like you, I was always quite sort of private, in as much as I would never in a million years have come onto Instagram ever and done like a video and put that out as a reel and done what we're doing now. Just not in a million years. But the really interesting thing, or one of the really interesting things about podcasting, is that I have found, well, of course it gets easy like anything, because if you just do it and you kind of go through the fear and you come out the other side, it gets easier. But I've noticed, particularly with the minisodes, because the minisodes, for anyone who doesn't know, so I do a Tuesday guest episode and a Saturday minisode. And the mini-sodes are solo episodes, just me talking about kind of whatever the hell I feel. A lot of personal growth stuff and some stuff to do with being single and, you know, childless and da-da-da-da-da. But I've really noticed when I first started doing the mini-sodes, I would sort of agonize thinking, oh my God, you know, is this good enough? You know, why does anyone give a shit what I have to say about this? Like, what, like no one cares. Like, what are you doing? This is insane. And I would really agonize over those mini-sodes. And what I've noticed is that as the months, the now over a year has gone by, when it comes to those little episodes, whereas when I first started, I would need like a whole kind of runway of time to give myself enough time to sort of work out what I was going to talk about, work out what I was going to say, you know, record it, sort of edit it again or record it again or whatever, like give myself loads of leeway to sort of change it. Whereas now I'll literally be like, oh, you know, it might be the Friday and I'll be like, shit, I've got to record a mini-sode. And then I'll be like, what the hell am I going to talk about? And I'll literally kind of pull something out of my arse, excuse my French, and just go, okay, well, I guess I'm going to talk about that. And then I'll just go, blah, 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 you know, just do whatever and then upload it. And I've realized that whereas in the beginning, I would never have done that. But I think what it does, I think one of the main things that podcasting does is that it builds trust in yourself, because you have to have that. You have to have that trust in yourself, because if you didn't, you would just be too scared to ever do anything. So I think that's one of the things that I have kind of cultivated, is that sort of self-trust. That doesn't mean that everything I put out there, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm really happy with that at all. But it just means that whereas before I was going, what if I'm actually just speaking a load of drivel and I don't realize? And actually, have you ever had that where you're just in a solo episode, you're like, maybe I'm talking absolute shit and I don't even realize it's going to go out to the world, and I don't realize that actually I had some kind of momentary lapse of reason and I just started talking complete gobbledygook. Like those kinds of doubts, they still come up, but the point is that when you do it over and over and over again and you push yourself out of your comfort zone over and over and over and over again, you do build that trust in yourself. And the other thing I wanted to pick up on that you said, Polly, is how the people that related to your first episode, and I had exactly the same thing. And because you and I think we're both doing topics, you know, obviously yours is about perimenopause, mine's about being a spinster. So those two topics, it's not like a podcast on gardening or music or crime where there are like loads and loads and loads. Ours are quite sort of, you know, not so talked about topics. And I think what you realize when you just go, fuck it, I'm going to do it, is you realize that there are people out there, even when you're doubting yourself, going, no one gives a shit, no one cares what I have to say. But you realize that actually they do. And there are people out there going, oh my God, it's like people have said, and I'm sure you've had the same thing, people have said to me, it's like you were in my brain. It's like you were reading my mind. And do you know somebody called Jen Gottlieb? Have you heard of Jen?
Yes.
I absolutely love her. She's American, and I just think she's really, really cool. And she talks a lot about the kind of fear of getting over what other people think and being visible. And in fact, she's got a new book out, which I'm definitely going to read, called Be Seen. And one of the things that she talks about is she has this thing called HOPE, which stands for help one person every day. And I always try and think of that. It's like I was saying earlier, I just think if one person resonates with this episode or resonates with this post or resonates with this reel, if it makes one person feel better, or I get one email saying thanks so much, you know, I really relate to that. Like, for example, I did a newsletter, my newsletter yesterday. Somebody sent me a message and said, thank you for that, I needed to hear that. So it's that's what it's about, isn't it? When somebody says, oh my God, that is what I needed to hear today.
Yeah, it's about detaching yourself from it and making it all about you. Because I think for so many of us, we're all in our head and we're thinking it's all about us. It's our ego, isn't it? It's all about us.
Totally.
What is everyone going to think about us? But the moment you can kind of start to think about, actually, who am I not to do this? Because actually that one person really needs to hear that. So it's kind of more, you know, everyone always says, doesn't it? If you can, you know, service is one of those things which is one of the which makes you feel so good and is so purposeful, but without sounding too like cringy about it, but it's actually makes it so much easier to do all of this stuff when you realize it's not really about you, when you can actually, and that was the only way I could do it. This is the only way I've managed to get through it, because for so long it was all about me. What would people think? Comparing myself to others, I'm totally shit at this. I haven't got a voice. My words come out all jumbled. Who am I to do this? I've thought about that for so long. And the only way I've really managed to kind of get over that is like, it's not about me. It's about these other people who I've got something I can help them with, then I'm going to share it. And that kind of has really, really worked for me. And it's also this sort of comparisonitis as well. It's so easy. And I still get it. And I still suffer from it. And I really have to work on this. I'll look at somebody else's Instagram feed, or I'll look at someone else doing a podcast on a similar subject to mine, and oh my God, they're doing so well and they've got all of these listeners, and oh my God, their episodes are so much better than mine. And actually, it's like I have to be quite strict with myself. I've had to unfollow on Instagram a few people because it just suddenly makes me feel really anxious. Or so you have to sort of be aware of it, because as much as you say, oh, I'm not going to compare myself, your ego still gets in the way. So I have to be quite strict, and I do just try and keep in my lane. It's about focusing on what I'm doing, focus on my little mission, and trying not to get distracted by those other people and comparing myself to them, because they're not me. We might be talking about a similar subject, but some people might want to hear it from me rather than that other person. We're also different, and we kind of relate to people in very different ways. Yeah. So when you realise that, and you realise, okay, maybe I do have something to share, and maybe people do want to hear it from me, then I'm just going to keep going and staying in my lane, keeping quite blinkered, and not trying to get too distracted by everyone else.
Totally. I relate to that so much. And I remember when I first started the podcast, I basically hadn't done any research at all into, what other podcasts were out there on the subject. I hadn't looked because I kind of didn't want to know. And then I think it must have been just a few weeks before I launched. And I discovered this other podcast about being single and not having kids. It's called A Single Serving Podcast, and by this amazing American woman called Shani Silver, who I've had on as a guest. She's amazing. But I discovered her podcast, and I was like, holy shit, she's so brilliant. Oh my God, this is a disaster. No one's going to listen to mine because hers is so much better than me, and she's brighter than me, and she's funnier than me, and she's this da 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 da. But exactly like you say, you can't think about it like that, because apart from anything else, every single person of 8 billion people on this planet, because it's 8 freaking billion people on the planet, everyone resonates with different people, and you realize that actually the kind of people who like Shani's podcast may not like mine, and vice versa, or people might like them both. And it's not a competition, because the only person you're in competition with ultimately is yourself. And it is really, like you said, you have to be really strict with yourself to not go down that rabbit hole of comparison, because if you do that, it just takes all the joy out of it. And then if you start worrying about other people's downloads, or oh my God, are they higher up in the charts, or they're better on Instagram? And if you go down that road, then it's just kind of game over. So you have to just, like you said, stay in your lane and keep. And I very much keep my blinkers on. I'm like, I don't want to know. Yeah. Don't really want to know what other people are doing. And also, I think we've talked about this in another Monday Motivation, but one thing is that when there's a message that you need to hear,
A very quick break to ask you to hit the follow or subscribe button if you haven't already. And if you're enjoying this episode, I'd be super grateful if you could hit those stars and rate it too. Thank you.
This like personal growth is a classic example of this, and sort of spirituality and all of that. Like, I have had to hear the same core message a million times from different people before the penny actually drops. So I think it's so true to say that you can't hear the same thing enough times, and that's the other thing. It's a fear of like saying the same thing over and over again, like saying a similar caption on Instagram, or talking about a similar thing on the podcast. But actually, it's that thing of where somebody might be listening to something and they'll hear something that you say in a very specific way, just because, for whatever reason on that day at that time, that person's like, oh my God, I get it. That, yes, yes, so it's sort of keeping that in mind, that we need to hear these things over and over again from potentially multiple people. At least I do.
Yeah. Oh, totally. I totally agree. Oh, yeah. And actually, I worry about that sometimes with my podcast. Oh my God, we're talking about, what to eat again, or we're talking about again, but with different people, and everyone brings their own uniqueness and their own angle to the subject that actually, yeah, it's still interesting. I'm still finding it interesting talking to these people.
Yeah.
So I think, yeah, you just got to, one person might resonate with that particular person, or with what I'm saying in a particular way on that particular day. So I think you just got to keep going. And actually, also on that whole comparisonitis subject, what I've realised is it's these people who potentially you could go, oh my God, they're so much better than me, and start to really worry about what they're doing. The best thing to do is just invite them into your world as well, and get, as you say, get them on the podcast, speak to them, collaborate. And everyone we're all on the same mission. We're all trying to do the same thing. And actually, I feel like I've made so many incredible connections by doing that. And everyone's really lovely, everyone really supportive generally. And so, yes, it's been great for that. And actually, as you said earlier, it opens so many doors to opportunities. I've had so many wonderful things coming out of this podcast. Like, I'm going to speak at my first wellness festival this summer because of it. That was like, oh my God.
Absolutely.
Various things like that. Yeah, just literally just come out of nowhere because people have listened to the podcast.
Yeah, totally. It's amazing. One thing, Polly, like basically we've been talking about this without actually naming it, but imposter syndrome.
Yes, yeah.
That thing that we, and I think everybody suffers from imposter syndrome. It's just that we don't assume that everybody does, but actually everybody does. So you just kind of have to. In fact, the thing that I always go back to, and I always say to myself when I'm worried about, what people think, or like, who am I to do this, and I just always go back to thinking, you know what? No one gives a shit, because my little podcast is not that important, and people are not agonizing over it. They're not having 3-hour-long conversations about it. They don't give a shit. They're going to consume what they're going to consume, and then they're going to move on to the next thing. And that's what people do, because we're all way too concerned thinking about ourselves than to be worrying about what somebody's saying on a podcast. And if there is, if there's something that I put out that I worry about, if I find myself kind of going down that road of like, oh my God, I'm really worried about this, I just think, Lucy, no one cares about you. No one, not in a kind of like, no one cares about you, but just in a really good way, like, no one cares. It's like, what's that expression? Today's news is tomorrow's fish and chip paper.
Yeah. And in fact, it's the opposite, I think. People are just like, yeah, good on you. Well done for doing it. And actually almost like, oh my God, if she, it can be so inspiring. If she can do it, then bloody hell, so can I. So I think, yeah, it's just, as you say, it requires courage, doesn't it? And it is really hard. And it is, I always feel like it's a bit like it's like a little elastic band. You've just got to keep doing it and stretch it a little bit, and then it kind of comes back again, and you've got to stretch it a little bit more. So you're just constantly stretching your comfort zone of what you're comfortable with. And God, even that, at the beginning, I couldn't even bear to listen back to my own voice when I was editing. That was a problem. You got to edit it and listen to your voice. It's like, oh my God, my voice is awful. I hate it. But now I don't give a shit. It's because I've listened to it so much, and that when I think how it used to make me cringe, so that I've just stretched so far that's okay. So it's just constantly stretching yourself, becoming more resilient, and you can it's just increasing that bandwidth, and it's amazing. It is amazing. Everyone can do it. It just takes a little bit of courage.
I couldn't agree more. It really is finding that courage. It's so true. You have to get used to feeling of discomfort. You just have to be able to tolerate feeling uncomfortable. That's ultimately what it is. Because if you can't tolerate feeling uncomfortable, then you're never going to do anything that is outside the parameters of what you've already done in your life. And to grow in any way and sort of change and evolve, you just simply, it's just a non-negotiable. You have to be able to sort of sit in those feelings of discomfort. And actually, there's another thing that I say to myself, and I've said this to coaching clients as well. It's like, okay, Lucy, so what's going to happen? Like, what's the worst that's going to happen? So you put something out and everybody hates it. So then what? And you're like, I don't know. And so when you actually ask yourself, well, what's going to happen? Like, what is going to happen? Well, nothing. Ultimately, you're going to feel like a bit of a twat for, you know, a couple of hours, and then you'll go to bed and get up the next morning and carry on with your life. It's not a big deal. One other thing, actually, for anyone who is thinking of starting a podcast, because it's such a great thing to do for so many reasons. I think that, you know, we can procrastinate and put things off, like we were saying at the beginning, until we think we're ready, or you know, quote unquote ready, or we think it's got to be perfect. But actually, when it comes to starting a podcast, it really is just about starting. But what I wanted to say was, I think the thing that can sometimes put people off starting a podcast is going, oh my God, but the technical and the microphone and the I've been doing a podcast for a year and 3-4 months. I do not have a microphone. I record my solo episodes into my laptop or my phone, literally without a mic, and I do all of my guest interviews on Zoom. So all I'm trying to say is, for anyone who is kind of coming up with excuses as to why they don't have this, and, oh, well, I can't afford to invest in podcast equipment. Well, you don't need to, because I literally do it on my laptop, everything, or my phone. So, you know, I think that can be one of the excuses that people find to stop them. But that is, at the end of the day, that is just procrastination, and that's just putting it off.
Yeah.
We're worried.
But you've got to, it's like with anything, you've got to have a willingness to do it. So, I mean, I always talk about, you know, even if you want to make any change in your life, you've got to have a willingness. But then often we find things to stop us from doing that. But if you've got that willingness, then it is totally and utterly possible. Anything is possible. It's just about building up that resilience to be able to put yourself in that situation to go forward. And I would say that building resilience, again, in any area of your life, is going to help with all of this sort of stuff in terms of getting uncomfortable. So that's why people do crazy things like cold water plunging or running longer than they think they want to, or because that is a way of building resilience, putting yourself in a situation where you feel uncomfortable, and then anything is more possible. You know, if that makes sense.
No, it makes complete sense. It really does.
Yeah.
God, we should wrap up. We've done our half an hour.
It always goes so quickly, doesn't it?
I know. It's been a pleasure, as always.
It really has. So good chat. I didn't realise we were going to be talking about imposter syndrome, talking about comparisonitis, talking about getting uncomfortable. So all good topics. All right, my love. Well, listen, have a wonderful day, and
I'll see you this time next week.
See you next week.
Lots of love.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.